Good morning, Roots. Hey, it is the second week of Eastertide, so we're going to begin our time together with the Easter acclamation. If you remember from last week when we worshiped together, the Easter acclamation is simple. One person says, "Christ has risen," and then the other person replies, "He is risen indeed." So we are going to do the acclamation together, and if you will say it and maybe even type it in, we will begin our time reminding ourselves that we are now living in the life and light and possibility of the resurrection. So, Christ has risen. Yes, he is risen indeed. So yeah, we are in Eastertide. The beautiful, like they call it the Great 50. The 50 days following Easter. It's 40 days to commemorate Jesus' 40 days with his disciples. Then 10 days later, up until the Pentecost. So those 50 days are called Eastertide. And during this time, we are reflecting on the resurrection. We are leaning, like I said, into the possibility of the resurrection. We are celebrating the creativity and the unity of the resurrection. We are being Easter people. And Pastor TC did an amazing job last week at just really setting up for us, what does it mean to be Easter people? And I really loved how he reminded us that, when we think about Easter and the resurrection, that it's not just a one-time event, that Paul in his teachings was not saying, hey, we believe in Jesus because of this one thing he did. No, we believe in Jesus because the power of the resurrection informs and infuses our lives in such a way that we are transformed and we create a transformed community, that we are made whole. And we are beloved. And I love that so much because for me, the background that I came from really did just kind of lean hard into Easter Sunday. Woo! Easter Sunday, we got our picture, we did our Easter egg hunt, we did our thing, and then that was it. Like, we didn't really have anything again until Christmas. And then, woo, baby Jesus was born, and we do our gifts, and we do our pageant, and we have some eggnog, maybe some cookies. And then nothing else. Until woo, Easter again. And then it's just like this wild kind of rhythm that just was always about this mountaintop experience and then nothing. But what I love about Eastertide and what I love about the way we are approaching this idea of being Easter people is that we are saying we are not content with just the woo big experiences, like yay, and then nothing else. We want something that's more long-lasting, that's sustainable, that really informs our lived experience. That if we are going to believe in Jesus, that we want to believe in Jesus every single moment of every single day. And we want what we believe in and what we have faith in to be relevant, because we know what it's like to live in bodies. We know what it's like to be in relationships with others. We know what it's like to have financial troubles or health scares or health complications. Like, we know what it's like. That we're so keenly aware of. And so when we talk about finding our identity in Jesus, it's this ongoing commitment to learn how to fully believe in Jesus in our real, actual, practical, everyday lives. And so that's why I've entitled today's sermon, Becoming Easter People. Because we're going to fast forward through the Great 50. Lots of pastors are preaching on, different moments where Jesus was showing up for the disciples this Sunday and Sundays to come. But in this Easter People series, we want to explore how we can live in the resurrection as this community of misfits, finding our identity in Jesus. So we're going to become Easter people. We're just going to, like I said, fast forward straight to the book of Acts. The book of Acts was when the disciples began to bring people together and those people began to form a community of people whose lives were informed and infused by the resurrection. and who chose to be in relationship with each other because they knew being in relationship with each other would encourage them to continue finding their identities in Jesus, to continue exploring the Jesus way. So we're going to look at Acts 2, 42 through 47. So it's on the screen, so read along with me. So this is the description of those Jesus followers after the Great 50. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So this description is of a people who didn't just have the woo, yay, awesome, like Jesus was here and he like totally like ascended. Wasn't that like a rad experience? But there are people who said, wow, this thing happened and I can't go back. I don't know what it's like to live a life that is not informed by the resurrection and infused by the power of the Holy Spirit. What? And so they came together in this commitment to living in the power of the resurrection. And as they did, they had some rituals. They had some things that they did to keep them connected to each other, to keep them connected to what they saw in Jesus's life and ministry and relationships with others, to keep them connected to what they believe was true about the character of God because of what they saw in Jesus, to keep them connected as a community who is for each other. Because newsflash, the stronger they got, the larger they got, the more lives that were being transformed and added to their number, the more of a problem they became to the empire. And so they became this family that was truly for each other and protective of each other. But this didn't happen just because they were like, woo, we did this thing. This happened because they engaged in these regular practices of fellowship and breaking bread and prayer, like you just heard in Acts 2, 42 through 47. Now, over the pandemic, I read a book a couple times that has really just been so impactful for me. And it's by a theologian and a teacher and a researcher named Castor Turkill. And the book is entitled The Power of Ritual, Turning Everyday Activities into Soulful Practices. He says in his book, how might I find deeper happiness? The science points to an answer in the abstract. Find more community. Deepen your connections with others. Be with others in meaningful ways. Find rituals to organize your life. It will boost your happiness, give you greater joy, and even add 10 years to your life expectancy, science suggests. So, he has in his book several different types of rituals that communities do, and I would encourage you to go take a look at it because he does a really great job in not only talking about rituals and practices for community and transformation, but rituals and practices for internal transformation that allows us to be brave enough to enter into those community spaces, that allows us to have vulnerability and self-awareness. Again, I've read it twice. It's such a good book. When Pastor TC and I were talking about some of the things that we both grieved that we lost in the pandemic, and something that we're both super committed to, it's pushing past that social awkwardness or that antisocial behavior that we both kind of naturally fell into a little bit, because that's what we grew up with. And then the pandemic asked us to not spend time with people in significant face-to-face, in-person ways because we wanted to protect them, and we are so about loving our neighbor. But now we're both kind of, like I said last week at church, we just don't know how to be. And so what I have thought about often as I was preparing this message was that in order for us to become Easter people, we're going to have to start practicing the resurrection together. We're going to have to begin to have practices and rituals and a commitment to being together to push past some of the things that we lost in the pandemic, some of the anxieties that we now function with, that we're maybe even high functioning with, some of the fears, some of the questions. We're going to have to step into these spaces and process them with one another, or so that we can be with one another, because the resurrection has come. We are now living in the power of the resurrection. We are now informed by the story of the resurrection, that the things that we thought were dead, the things that we thought we had lost, the things that we were confused about, we have more clarity about. There is now life and possibility. We are grateful for the vaccine. We are grateful that many of our children are able to get vaccinated. We are grateful for the healing that we're seeing in our community. We are grateful for the space that we have, and for the love that we have, that we share with one another. We are grateful. And as grateful people, we enter into this season leaning into the possibility of what could be, what is more. And I think that if we look back at our passage in Acts, there's some indications from the Spirit of what could be. What does it look like for us to practice the resurrection together? Well, here are some practices of Easter people that I noticed in the passage. The first is the apostles' teachings, which came to them in the form of letters. And so they read the apostles' teachings. There was sacred reading that they studied together, that they bounced ideas off of each other, that they read poetry and beautiful words and painted beautiful pictures about who God is. There's a sacredness of study together. There was fellowship and fun. That they were meeting with each other in homes, and that they were connecting. That they ate together, which that needs no explanation. That they prayed and worshiped together, and that there was hospitality. Again, the opening of their homes to one another. Like we talked about last week, we are introducing again something that worked out really well at the beginning of the pandemic, the journey groups. Journey groups are our way of resisting the isolation and the loneliness and the social awkwardness that we have maybe adapted or just learned to deal with because of the pandemic. Casper ter Kuile says, in the midst of a crisis of isolation where loneliness leads to deaths of despair, being truly connected isn't a luxury, it's a lifesaver. So we are going to lean into journey groups again, but this time we're going to do it a little bit differently. In the past, we've had 2 or 3 people come together to encourage each other, do some sacred reading, some prayer, some connecting, maybe if they felt comfortable eating. And what we found was some journey groups seemed to work really well, and they were able to push through, some of the frustrations around Zoom or even illnesses and things like that, but some groups didn't. And so what we are going to do is we're going to lean into the example of the early church in Acts that really relied on households to come together. And we are going to be putting together 3 to 5 households. And a household is just whoever is in your apartment or house or townhome or double wide or whatever. So if it's just you and your cat, sure, you and your cat can be in a journey group. Don't know if you want to bring them to church or not. That's on you. But we're going to be putting these together, these groups together, in order for us to have an opportunity to connect with each other in a more intimate and intentional way. We're going to be able to get to know some of the new people who have joined Roots, maybe because of over the pandemic, and so we mostly have been seeing them online, but now we're seeing them in person, and so we're going to be together in that way. We're also going to spend some time in our journey groups just practicing those practices of Easter people, the sacred reading, the fellowship and fun, eating together, prayer and worship, and hospitality. Journey groups can be summed up in just one word: together. They provide misfits a place to connect with others, to grow in faith and friendship. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how journey groups are going to work. So the leadership of the journey groups are going to be two particular leaders. So each journey group will be about 3 to 4 households, but then they'll have a leadership team member who's in that journey group, and then a host family or a host couple or a host in that journey group. So those two people will be working together to care for the journey group, to help organize things, to kind of do the logistics and the dreaming together. So I want to introduce you to the leadership team if you don't know who they are. So there's Kirsten, there's Amy and Emmanuel, Darren, and then of course Pastor TC and myself. So we partner together with our host, and the journey group will have just 4 main components. One will be fun. There will be a bingo board that we'll give at the end of the sermon series that'll have like over 40 ideas of connections. And then there's also going to be incentives connected to actually getting together and spending time. One of the incentives, like the biggest one that we're offering, is a cabin for the whole journey group to have a weekend away. So they can decide if they want all just adults or kids and adults. But we really want you to lean into having fun this summer with your journey group. Faith, so there'll be spiritual practices and a study together, which you all can decide together. Sunday service. So the journey groups will help share in the setup, the hospitality, and the cleanup of one worship gathering every 2 months. There's 4 journey groups. We meet in person twice a month, so a journey group will only be on once every 2 months. Pastor TC and I will take care of music and the preaching and teaching and the opening up of the space, and maybe even bringing snacks to the journey group that's setting up that week. Also, prayer and support for any of the members who might have like a pastoral need. And if something does come up in a journey group, Pastor TC and I are always available and open to receive those requests so that we can step in and serve as well. Journey groups are going to meet wherever they could choose wherever they meet. So it could be at the host or their host family's home. It could be at the LT member's home. It could be at a park. It could be at a restaurant, a coffee shop, whatever. You all decide how you want to meet. You all decide if you want to do all families. You want to divide up the parents so every other week, so that there's always somebody with a kid because you only want to be adults only. Those are things you can figure out on your own. But we do want you to focus on gathering at least twice a month, one socially, and then one with like a focus on spiritual care and formation. Now you could do something like a brunch together during a live Sunday, a Roots Live Sunday, where you have brunch together and you watch the sermon and then you talk. That's something that you could easily do, and that we encourage you to do. And then the other thing that we're really excited about is that each journey group will receive what we call a joy grant, where the leadership team and the pastoral team have come together and we've decided that we want to invest in these journey groups. There's 4 of them. So they'll each receive a check for a certain amount to have fun this summer. So we really hope that you prayerfully consider joining a journey group, and in the weeks to come, I'll introduce you to some of the leaders, the hosts of the journey groups, because we really want to be Easter people. But in order for us to be Easter people, we have to practice. We have to practice the rituals and the way of the resurrection together. For us to live in the power of the resurrection, for that to inform our lives, for us to be willing and to push past all of the awkwardness and all of the concerns that we may have to enter into this new thing, we have to know that there's something worthy and good on the other side of all of that hard work. And that is the resurrection. That is being Easter people. And there's no way that we can truly see that unless we do it together. We can see the light and the love and the joy of the resurrection in each of us as we gather together. We can call it out and celebrate it. We can pray over each other when we're feeling like death signatures are written all over our life. I'm going to end with this quote from Padre Atuma. Padraig is a poet and a theologian that I deeply love. But he says that it is in the shelter of each other that people live. And I'm going to close with this one thing that my dad used to tell me. So my dad served 2 terms. He did 2 tours of Vietnam. And because he had a brother, he would go and his brother would be stateside or would be here. And then his brother would go, my dad would be here, and then they would swap. Okay. So my dad was navigating so much as a Marine. And Vietnam was a horrible, horrible experience for him. He was navigating his mom's fear and anxiety, his brother's frustration, and then all of the signatures and vestiges of war. And so my dad used to say this thing. He used to say, whenever he would bump up against an obstacle or whenever he would have a frustration, he would say, I didn't survive 2 tours in Vietnam for, and then he'll like say the thing that is in his way. So like one time he wanted to order Chinese food for our family. And my mom was like, we have food here. And my dad was really happy. He just got paid. And he was like, Sonia, I didn't survive 2 tours in Vietnam to not be able to buy my family Chinese food on my payday. Then there was one time when my dad was really advocating for a child that he was working with. My dad was a psychologist for the state of Texas. His office was in Houston, and he was one of the psychologists that they would bring children that they found in homes, like if there was a neglect call or CPS came out and did a welfare check and they found that their children was in the home or a child was being abused, and they would remove them from their home. They would remove them and take them to my dad for an assessment, and then they would take them and put them in the foster care or put them with a social worker. So my dad was always like sort of the first person to receive these kids, and my dad was really advocating for one student, I remember, and he was so upset because he was catching resistance from one of his supervisors for what he felt like this kid needed. And I remember him saying, I didn't survive 2 tours in Vietnam to not make sure this kid has a safe place to sleep tonight. And I love that because I feel like I've picked that up. That statement from my dad has such a resolve. It is a commitment to resilience. It is an acknowledgement of what he's gone through, but a proclamation, a declaration that he's going to have something more, something better. That all of that he went through was not wasted. It just informed who he is and what he's going through now. And so sometimes I catch myself saying that, well, I didn't survive this to not be able to do this. And I found myself saying that about the pandemic. I didn't get through 2 years of the pandemic to not set healthy boundaries. I didn't get through 2 years of the pandemic to not be honest about the people who I want to be friends with. I didn't get through 2 years of the pandemic to feel shame over having Oreo cookies as an evening snack. I didn't get through 2 years of the pandemic to give up on my commitment to love my neighbor as myself. I catch myself saying this phrase of resilience, and that's a little bit how I feel about being an Easter person. That we've seen too much. We know too much. We've survived so much. And in God's economy, none of that is wasted. And I can imagine the disciples and the early church being like, we didn't just go through 3 years of following Jesus and then 3 days of Jesus having been crucified, and then we don't know where he is, and then 50 days of Jesus just rocking around with us, to not be a community, to not be committed to one another, to not show up and be ambassadors of the Jesus way. We didn't go through all that for nothing. So Roots, that is what I have to offer you. We didn't go through the last 2 years for nothing. No, we went through those last 2 years and they mattered and they were good in a lot of ways, but they were hard too. But now we are Easter people. We are now living in the power of the resurrection. We are now allowing the Holy Spirit to infuse our community with new life and new hope, new possibilities and creativity. And I really love this journey for us. So my friends, Have a beautiful rest of your day. Go in peace knowing that you are beloved and that you belong. And let us continue on being Easter people because Christ has risen. Yes, he has risen indeed. Amen.